In question 24 we're given the following diagram here, and we're told this represents the positions of the muscles of an athlete leaving the starting blocks for a race. So position 1 is the starting position, position 2 is what it ultimately moves to. We're then asked to work out which muscles contract and which relax in order to bring about the change from position 1 to position 2. So in this question what we have to do is examine these muscles and examine the total movements and assess which muscles must contract and relax in order to mediate this process. Well, having a look, we should first assess what movements happen with respect to the individual limbs and joints. So when it comes to the thigh, we can see that it has been pulled in a backwards direction as follows, in order to ultimately extend backwards like this to generate force by pressing against this starting block. So the thigh moves in that direction, and we can see when it comes to the shin, or the lower leg, from the knee onwards, we can see that there's ultimately a bit of a straightening out at the knee joint. Compare the angle here to the angle here, so obviously there's going to be a straightening of the leg. And finally, having a look at the foot, we can see that it goes from this position here, this angle ultimately extends as well, so we can say that this is a third movement at each of our three parts of the leg. Okay, so which muscles would mediate this process? So we have to think about which muscles are acting at a particular joint. When it comes to the hip joint, which is the one that ultimately mediates the movement of the thigh, we only have one muscle in contention, so that's Q, so we can identify Q as mediating this process. When it contracts, it ultimately pulls the thigh in this direction. Now when we have to think about the movement of the lower leg, well, we need to pull this forwards, so the thing to do that, operating on the knee joint, would be muscle R, because that shortening and contracting would ultimately pull the knee joint in this direction, ultimately mediating a straightening of the leg. So we can identify R, and finally we have T, which mediates this movement of the foot in a backwards direction, since ultimately it contracting and shortening, we should always imagine contraction as sort of a shortening of the muscle, it will pull the ankle joint in this direction, ultimately forcing the foot to follow through and ultimately being a bit more of an extended angle. So we can say our answer is that Q, R and T contract. Now to think about which relax, well, when it comes to relaxation and contraction of muscles, we need to think about the antagonistic muscles to the ones that we identified. So the muscles doing the opposite function to the ones that we identified. Both can't be contracting at the same time, since that would generate contradictory movements and lead to muscle damage. So we have contraction of R, therefore we must have relaxation of the antagonistic muscle, which is P, because P mediates the flexion, i.e. the bending of the knee joint. So P is antagonistic to R, and when it comes to S is antagonistic to T, since it ultimately mediates more flexion at the ankle joint as opposed to more extension, which is what T mediates. So we have our answer that P and S relax and Q, R and T contract, and this corresponds to option C in our answer table, therefore our answer is C.